I just watched a Netflix true crime documentary called Maternal Instinct, and this might be one of the strangest criminal cases I've ever heard about. Not because the crime itself is impossible to understand. Actually, the motivation is pretty easy to understand. What's almost impossible to understand is how this woman thought any of this was going to work. Because this is a story where the criminal plan is so unbelievably bad that if the consequences weren't so horrifying, it would almost be a comedy about the world's least competent criminal. Obviously, it isn't funny. A woman was murdered and her unborn child died as a result. So I don't want to make light of that part of this story, but the sheer number of holes in this woman's plan is just astonishing. The documentary is about a woman who appears to have had a history of lying and fabricating illnesses and personal circumstances in order to get attention and to maintain relationships. And then she meets a guy named Wade. They start dating, and Wade is obviously attracted to her. She seems attractive, they're compatible, and they apparently enjoy the same kind of lifestyle. And then she tells him something pretty important. She's about to become extremely rich. Apparently, she's connected to this wealthy Texas family and is going to inherit something like 8 or $20 million, a lot of money. The exact number doesn't really matter because it doesn't exist. It's a lot of money. She tells Wade that there's some dispute with her mother over the inheritance, but that her grandmother is on her side, and eventually she's going to get the money. And Wade is understandably interested in this. They even start looking at an enormous ranch that they're supposed to buy, supposedly going to buy once she gets her inheritance. And this is where the whole thing starts falling apart because there is no inheritance. There isn't this enormous fortune waiting for her somewhere. And when the real estate people start doing what real estate people normally do when someone wants to buy a multi-million-dollar property, verify that they actually have the money, she starts inventing people. She now has a lawyer who doesn't exist. She has some kind of bank representative who doesn't exist. She creates all these fictional characters who are supposedly handling her finances. And when somebody tries to contact the supposed bank representative, they get this bizarre letter basically saying, "Stop bothering my client," which, if you're trying to buy a $20 million ranch, is probably not how you want the financial verification process to go. But somehow, the biggest lie is still to come. She tells Wade she's pregnant. There's just one problem. She cannot be pregnant. She had previously had a hysterectomy. So this isn't one of those situations where somebody is confused about dates or gets a pregnancy test wrong. Pregnancy is, in her case, medically impossible after this hysterectomy. But she commits to the story anyway. She gets a fake pregnancy belly. She produces fake ultrasound images and documents. She announces that she's having a girl. They have a bizarre gender reveal party. She continues pretending to be pregnant for months. And every time the due date gets closer, there's another explanation for why the baby hasn't arrived. She's not ready. The baby's not ready. The mother's not ready. Something is wrong. She's not eating enough. She's eating too much. Any kind of excuse to explain the fact that the baby is not there. And eventually, Eventually, we're talking about 10 months of this, which, if you know anything about math, that's not possible. Now, I can understand that pregnancy can vary, but 10 months? At some point, somebody has to ask a question. Eventually, people from this woman's previous life contact Wade's family and tell them that she's lying. She's not pregnant. She can't be pregnant. And they know that she can't even become pregnant because of her previous surgery. So now she's got a huge problem. And this is where the story goes from bizarre to horrific. Because the woman had previously worked as a wedding photographer, and through that work, she met another woman who was really pregnant. Like, I mean, not, she was pregnant. And she apparently decided that the solution to her fake pregnancy problem was to murder that woman and take that baby out of her belly. The woman was killed and the baby died. And then she attempted to make it look as though she had actually given birth and experienced a medical emergency. She contacted emergency services and ended up at a hospital. And the documentary actually begins with footage from the hospital. At first, I thought this was going to be one of those documentaries where everyone thinks the woman is lying, but then it turns out that she really was pregnant. But no, she wasn't pregnant. And obviously, once you're in a hospital claiming that you've just had a miscarriage or other pregnancy related emergencies, doctors are going to examine you. They're going to figure out what's actually going on, or in this case, not going on. So the entire thing falls apart almost immediately. And that's when I started thinking, what exactly was the plan here? Because true crime documentaries usually have this question: how did they get away with it? Or, in other cases, how did investigators catch them? But with this case, I'm watching it thinking, how did she think she was not going to get caught? Because almost every part of the plan creates another way to get caught. First of all, the pregnancy itself. If you're going to fake pregnancy, you probably need to know approximately how long human pregnancies last. I mean, it's about 9 months. It's not 10 months. Big difference. So that's the first flaw. Certainly not indefinitely. Then there's the fake money that she had, the fake lawyer, um, the fake bank representative, and the fake pregnancy, obviously, the fake medical documents, and the fact that people who knew her before are telling everyone that she's lying. And then there's one of the most bizarre parts of the entire story. She sent her husband on a trip to sell some hogs several hours away, and she gave them an address and a phone number of a real person. So he's supposed to go somewhere to deliver or pick up these animals, but when he arrives, the person there essentially says, "What are you doing here? We didn't order these." So that's a big flaw in your plan. So he's able to discover that the messages supposedly arranging the whole thing didn't even come from the number of the person who supposedly sent them. So even out without the murder plot, he's really suspicious now. So her husband is 4 hours away, standing somewhere with a bunch of hogs that nobody asked for. And I'm thinking, like, what was your alibi? Like, what was your plan? Because if you're trying to commit a murder secretly, sending your husband 4 hours away with a truck full of unwanted livestock seems like an unusually efficient way to make sure somebody remembers exactly where he was and how odd it was that that happened. And then, of course, there's the hospital. If you're pretending that you've just had a baby or experienced a pregnancy related medical emergency, the hospital is probably one of the worst places to maintain this lie. Doctors are going to examine you, they're going to ask questions, they're going to look at your medical history, they're going to know whether you actually gave birth. Kind of important for the entire plot. And eventually the whole thing collapses even without the murdered woman in the same community, right? What's essentially especially bizarre is that this was happening in a relatively small community. People knew that the woman had had a hysterectomy. People who knew her were seeing her Facebook posts about this supposed pregnancy. And so, what are they supposed to do when they know that she's lying? And they were apparently unable to directly tell the family what they knew because of privacy laws. There was even a point when someone contacted the medical clinic to try and verify whether she had actually been receiving, you know, prenatal care. The clinic couldn't legally confirm anything, but the response was basically trust your gut, which pretty clear signal that somebody is lying. Like that's as close as you can get to legally saying that somebody is lying without actually saying you should probably investigate this. And actually, I feel bad for Wade, the guy in this. There are people in the documentary who basically suggest that he was motivated by the promise of money, and maybe that's partly true, but he had also been only dating this woman for like 4 months when the pregnancy thing started. And she was attractive. She was apparently very devoted to him. She was telling him that they were going to have, you know, an incredible life together. She was telling him that they were going to have millions of dollars. Like, how could he not be caught in that? Like, I can understand how somebody could be sucked into that kind of world. People make terrible decisions in relationships all the time, but there's a difference between I fell for somebody who lied to me and I fell for somebody who fabricated an entire pregnancy and eventually committed a double homicide to maintain the lie. Like, nobody in their right mind would expect that. And that's probably what makes this documentary so compelling. The filmmakers really don't have to do much. They don't need some elaborate mystery. They don't need to manufacture suspense. The story itself is completely insane. You keep watching and thinking, surely this can't get any crazier. And then it does. So, my overall reaction to Maternal Instinct is that it's an absolutely horrifying story, but also one of the most bizarre examples I've seen of a criminal plan that seems almost destined to collapse from the beginning. And I keep coming back to the same question. What was the end game? What was she actually trying to do? Was she trying to get money from Wade? Was she trying to buy the ranch? Was she trying to maintain the relationship? Was the pregnancy just another way of controlling the people around her? Because I don't think the documentary ever gives you a satisfying answer to what the long-term plan was. Maybe she didn't really have a long-term plan. It just keeps escalating. Lie, another lie, another lie, another lie, and then eventually a absolutely horrific crime. So, I guess the moral of this story: don't fake a pregnancy. Don't invent a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Don't create imaginary lawyers and bank representatives. And if you've already been lying about being pregnant for 10 months, maybe, and this is just a suggestion, don't escalate the situation by committing an even more horrific crime. And finally, if your plan involves sending your husband 4 hours away with a truck full of hogs to create some kind of elaborate distraction, maybe reconsider that plan. Because if the hogs are the most believable part of your alibi, you're probably in trouble. Maternal Instincts is a bizarre, disturbing true crime story. While I don't think it's a case where you spend much time wondering how the criminal was caught, you spend a lot of time wondering how she thought she ever was going to get away with it. And that's what makes this one so unbelievable. All right. If you like what I do, please subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to be the most prolific reviewer of all time, and I'm reviewing things that I like, interesting cases like this. I'm trying to get to 30 subscribers, so if you like what I do, leave a comment. Maybe maybe tell me why you think she would do something like this. Leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Thank you. My name is Adam. Bye bye.